an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Veronica Mars, Season 3, Episode 8 of Vice and Men. Sorry, Episode 7 of Vice and Men. In this episode, Veronica is being disappointed by the men in her life all over the place. To which I say, girl, get in line. It's only going to get worse. I don't know what to tell you. Life is just going to keep throwing this kind of thing at you. Simply wait for like 2016, 2018, and that'll just be the end of trust for men ever again. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. So guys, I made a big statement last episode. Oh, I'm so sorry. First of all, thank you very much to Anna for commissioning this episode. Anna, if you're listening, hi, and thank you. But I made a big statement last episode about how I wasn't a huge fan of the way that the show is handling the rape storyline. Forgive me, I'm moving my mic a little. And I stand by that. I don't really know what to make of this episode, because part of me feels like the idea that Veronica has to be victimized again is really annoying, but also it does feel a little bit inevitable if you are going to have a character investigating rape and all of the victims have been women and she is a woman. In the way that television plotting works, maybe the expectation that she would not be a potential victim is unrealistic. It's a shame because I don't want to do this. I don't think anybody wants to do this. Let's be honest. Like, you know what I'm saying? But I do really appreciate, of course, that she isn't actually victimized. She gets drugged, which is plenty bad enough, kids, honestly. I don't really love that it's like Logan who has to come to her rescue. And I don't love that it appears by the end of the episode that everything that happened with Logan is going to be forgiven because he saved her. I understand what they're doing. The show keeps doing this thing. And I think that overall, this kind of is indicative of the overall tone of this show, which it feels very sort of male driven. And by male driven, I mean, I feel like men seem to be in control of the writing. Whether there's a woman in the writer's room or not, women can also certainly they can fall victim to patriarchal standards as well. But let's be honest, more often than not, it's women being pressured to let go of what they wanted to do in favor of what men think are going to be good storylines. And there's just a real sense to this season, especially, in a way that I don't feel like it was. I don't want to say it wasn't present in the first two seasons, but it feels much more at the front of every scene. That Veronica is being presented as somehow deeply unreasonable, especially regarding Logan. And they keep on sort of giving him an out in this, like, they keep on framing things with her as if she is being too demanding, that the fact that she doesn't trust him is her problem and she's just driving him away. There's a lot of what a harpy sort of feeling. Then she has to walk everything back at the end of the episode. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but what it turns out happened that Logan didn't want to tell her about, which was what led to him telling her Mercer was innocent and that he had been with him, but he couldn't explain where they had been. It turns out that whole story is the two of them went to Tijuana. They were in adjoining hotel rooms. He could hear Mercer through the door with some girls. And Mercer was doing these cocktails that were like a flaming shot dropped into a beer. Something went wrong and he lit his room on fire. And the entire hotel wound up burning down, or motel, or whatever. Veronica, very reasonably, in my opinion, is like, wait, are you telling me that you guys didn't even make sure everybody was okay? You didn't even stick around to see what happened? You just fucking bailed? And I think that's a totally reasonable question. And the fact that he's just sort of allowed to get away with it, and I say that with the full understanding that next episode there may be more of a reckoning for him on that front. But as of right now, it feels like what the episode wants me to do is see that he was there for her in this moment when she was about to be attacked. And even though, as she puts it in her dialogue at the end of the episode, quote, even when I didn't love them well enough, they were still there for me. I guess I'm supposed to think, isn't it great that Logan still has her back even when she's being insufferable to him? I'm sorry, maybe my standards are just too high. But I don't think I could ever continue dating a man who was involved in the immolation of a hotel full of people and bailed and failed to take any responsibility on that at all. And I know it wasn't him who lit it on fire, but he's clearly not like holding Mercer accountable either. He's covering for him. And I just, whether or not he takes responsibility in the sense that he turns Mercer over, setting all that aside, the idea that he didn't try to like warn people and raise an alarm or do anything to like help. Now, I understand it's not his job to like run into a burning building to save people, and he didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turning. I'm sorry, I had to. I just can't. I don't think that I could ever respect a man again if he told me that was how he handled that situation. That's just too huge. And his defense is, I did what 9 out of 10 people would do in that situation. That may very well be true, but I want to be with the 1, not the 9 out of 10. So he tells her this story. The fact that she's rightly horrified, he sort of mocks as if, oh, what did I expect? This is exactly why I didn't want to tell you. She's reacting like a fucking sane human being, dude. What did you, do you think other girls wouldn't also react this way if you told them that your buddy burned down a building and you guys just left? That's not a normal thing that happens to people, dude. This isn't just like a comedy of errors that, what do you... And it just really, because of who Logan is and how privileged he has been and how many things that he has been involved with that are highly questionable. And everything that Logan has suffered as a character has been almost purely circumstantial, but it is rarely a result of his own actions. He has a horrible, abusive father because he happened to be born to an abusive father. His mother killed herself because she was in a horrible, abusive relationship that she felt trapped in. His girlfriend was killed because his horrific father was having an affair and she chose to have an affair. His brother, or friend's brother, killed himself in front of him because he happened to be there. All of that stuff, traumatizing, terrible, absolutely. And he has my sympathy on that. But none of those things were a direct result of the consequences of something that he himself chose to do. He could be seen as the victim in every of those cases. And I feel like as this continues, the show wants me to like be on his side a lot more. And I'm really starting to lose patience with the idea that he can just keep on pulling selfish shit. And I'm supposed to kind of overlook that because he loves Veronica? So what? You know, like he's supposed to earn that. He's supposed to do something worthy of being loved back. And I just don't really see him doing that. And every time that she's angry at him, it's played as this like character flaw. And in my opinion, it's her having a basic standard for how she wants to be treated and how she wants her boyfriend to communicate with her and have basic respect for her by telling her the truth of what's happening in his life. And this just, in particular, this thread of the plot rankled really bad this episode. I don't feel like I have a good grip on what the fuck the writers are trying to say. And I think I feel like I don't have a good grip because I don't want to believe what it is that I believe they, like subconsciously, I believe they do want me to think. I want to believe better of them. And I'm realizing I don't, like that track record doesn't really hold up. They don't have that in their history. So I don't know, guys. I'm so frustrated because the show keeps on doing these things that are like interesting in a general sense. And then they fumble it really bad and they come to these conclusions that I'm just left there sitting like, what? Really? And the whole plot of her helping this girl find her boyfriend and Veronica being sure that the dude is ghosting her because he's too cowardly to break up with her, that he's cheating probably already with this girl Scarlett, who's the Scarlet Woman, by the way, if we didn't catch that. I knew it was going to turn out that this guy genuinely something had happened to him because it was so obvious what the show was trying to do, which was juxtapose Veronica's cynicism with this girl's total faith in the guy that she's seeing. And the thing is, if it weren't for the way things worked out with Logan, I would kind of get what they mean. Like, there have been situations in my life that the more I like sort of see the way a lot of people operate when they're in relationships, the more I realize that like I am lucky to have been not only brought up to expect better, but over time, I feel like I have learned quickly what is a toxic relationship behavior and what isn't. And that is not to say I have avoided it successfully because that absolutely not always. But I am not the kind of girlfriend that checks her boyfriend's phone when he leaves it somewhere. I'm not the suspicious kind. And if a dude doesn't show up a bunch of places or is sort of like weird about things, him cheating or talking to somebody else is not the first thing that I think of. So I know that I'm rather lucky that way. And in that respect, I'm very much like this girl whose name I'm forgetting that Veronica works for this episode, where if something were to happen to Owen, granted we live together, so it's a different situation, but if something were to happen, people could try and tell me, you don't want to face the truth. There's obviously something going on with him and another woman, yada, yada, yada. I would be very much like this girl. I have perfect faith that Owen would never do something like that. And a part of that is also based in the fact that if he did, he is such a bad liar that I would know right away. But that's a whole other thing. So, excuse me, I just have a frog in my throat. So, in a vacuum, the idea of somebody believing the best of the person they are involved with and truly knowing without a doubt that this person isn't up to what it looks like they're up to is romantic and sweet, and it is what I think we should all aspire to in a relationship. That doesn't mean that we are blind and have, you know, a sort of unfounded faith in somebody. Being naive and having faith are not the same thing, despite what people may think. But when it is put up against what's actually going on with Logan, it just feels like a really false dichotomy to me. They're trying to act like, Veronica, you can either be like you are, or you can be like this girl and believe the best of somebody that you love. Well, even if she did believe the best of him, she's going to find out that he left a burning building. Is that the best? Is that something that she should have just taken on faith? Is that something that he should never have told her? He's going to keep that kind of secret from her and think that's a healthy thing to do? I just don't. I'm really curious next episode if there is going to be any sort of fallout on that. Because if there isn't, I'm going to have a problem with it. And if they keep trying to make it like Veronica should just have had faith in him, I'm not going to be here for it at all. Anyway, I've been talking for like 10 minutes and I have just been, it's pretty much been this one piece of the puzzle. But, you know, this is how it goes sometimes. So there's also the whole thing with Veronica being really disappointed in her father. There are a couple of other men in this episode who are, I mean, between Logan and her dad, then there's also the professor. She's really feeling away lately. And the professor, when she comes to class, he asks her to stay behind so he can talk to her. And he offers her this really great internship with the FBI. And says that he has some connections. He's going to get her moved to the top of the pile. And she understandably is like, dude, look, of course it sounds amazing, but I really feel like you're only doing this because you're afraid I'm going to blow the whistle on you. I don't plan on doing that. And I can't, in good conscience, take this because it feels like hush money. And he sort of wows her by saying, girl, look, what is going on here is totally separate from that. Yes, I understand why you would think that. But the truth is, the only thing that is ever going to matter to you after this is all done is your resume. Years from now, that's going to be the one thing that counts. And having this internship on your resume is going to be huge for you. So this has nothing to do with that. I truly believe that you are an outstanding student, that you deserve this, and I really want you to take this internship based on the fact that you have incredible potential that I think would be realized in a program like this. So whether you decide to say anything or not, whatever, please take the internship seriously. And she is kind of floored by that. And honestly, I really loved it. Because I thought the exact same thing as her. You know, last episode I was theorizing, what does this mean for her that she caught him doing this? Is this something that she could wind up sort of like leaning on him for? And I was worried that it was going to be a huge sort of, I thought that it might wind up being a really thorny issue for her, deciding whether or not he was giving her good grades based on being afraid that she was going to, rat on him, or whether she was going to feel like she could lean on certain things. Maybe he knows something in regard to an investigation and he doesn't want to tell her. And she's like, I mean, you could not tell me, or I could tell everybody that you're fucking the dean's wife. This seems to have sort of put all of that to rest. Now, that might be kind of a pipe dream. It might not. I just hope that this is genuinely the end of it, because she didn't want to be put in this position. She didn't go looking for dirt on him. She was set up by the TA, who's an asshole. And I understand the TA being bitter and being like, well, I thought he was a good guy too, and now it turns out he's kind of not, and I think you should know that. I understand that in theory, but it doesn't feel like that's genuinely what was going on there. I feel like he was almost hoping that if she found out he wasn't who she thought, she'd back off and he'd get to be star guy again. Or that if she was like seen finding out what was going on the way that it turns out she was, I think he was sort of hoping that the professor would push her away in response to her knowledge of this. I don't know if the professor is aware that Tim knows what's going on. I expect he does, but I'm not sure of it. I will say I appreciate the show making his previous sort of protege a dude, because if it was another girl, it would feel like he was kind of preying on beautiful young college women. And the fact that it's a guy sort of undercuts that a little bit. It makes it feel like, okay, this is genuinely about potential. But yeah, I'm hoping that this is the end of the situation, at least in terms of her involvement in the affair. I am wondering if the dean is going to find out a little bit later what's going on. And if he finds out that Veronica knew, is he going to feel a way about that? I'm really curious, those of you who are listening to this episode, what your feeling is about finding out somebody is cheating. Are you the kind of person that tells the person being cheated on? Are you the kind of person that feels it's none of your business and you don't want to get involved? Or are you the kind of person who it totally depends on who it is, whether or not you say anything? I am the kind of person, I'll be honest, that tends to tell. Whether or not it's my business, I do tend to. And I know that, seeing as how my relationship with Owen started, that's a hypocritical stance to take. But most of the time, I only would find out that somebody was cheating because I am close enough to them or the person they are cheating on to have been in the position to discover information. So that presupposition of closeness means that I would probably feel a responsibility in my friendship to one or the other party. Now, if it was my friend who was doing the cheating on somebody who I was not particularly friends with, I would probably side with my friend and not tell the spouse, because in that sense, I have a pre-existing real loyalty to somebody. But I have been on the, there were a couple of colleagues of mine somewhere that I worked, and they were engaged, and the guy had hit on me multiple times, really, really obviously, like basically propositioning me while they were together, and they were not yet engaged, but they were together. And then there was a pretty clear closeness between him and another coworker that a lot of people noticed, but nobody really had hard data that they were cheating. It was just, it seemed pretty clear to everyone. I, however, was friends with the female colleague in question and knew that indeed he was cheating with her, and she, who was engaged, was also cheating with him. And the third party, a woman who also worked with us, I watched her getting thinner and more worn looking over the course of a couple of months. And I was not planning on saying anything at the time because he was my boss. He was my direct supervisor. And it just felt like, well, that's a good way to just completely shoot myself in the fucking foot. But then I got another job and I gave my 2 weeks notice. And on the last day, I took her aside and I told her, not that he's cheating with so-and-so. I didn't name any names because the other girl was somebody that I was friendly with. But I did say, he's cheating on you. You can't marry him. And she said, thank you for being the only fucking person to be honest with me about this because I've been asking people and nobody wants to get involved. And I was honest. I said, honestly, I'm only getting involved because it's my last day and whatever fallout there is, I won't be here for it. But I just couldn't let you go into that when I know what I know. Like if I was able to tell you and, you know, not have my own career impacted by it based on him trying to get retribution on me, basically, retaliation. And that was one of those situations. It's a very particular one where you really know all the facts. But I think about that all the time, and I have never regretted telling, not even a little bit. There are so many variables in relationships about what people can do, about what's the right thing to do, this versus that. But having the bald-faced information is the number one most important thing. And nobody can make a good decision for themselves if they don't actually have all the facts. And somebody like that woman who was being cheated on, I believe that she was losing weight and looking exhausted and sad because she had a suspicion there was something going on and she was trying to get to the fucking bottom of it and she couldn't. And so she was second guessing herself. Am I crazy? Am I imagining things that aren't really there? He's assuring me there's nothing going on, really. Like, I firmly believe that I not only kept that woman from making a mistake in getting married, but I think I may have helped with her mental health in reassuring her that she wasn't crazy. And that is something for me in particular that is painful when there is dishonesty in a relationship, is the one person who wants to think the best of their partner being gaslit by the partner who often will lie about what's going on, or gaslighting themselves, telling themselves, no, you're just imagining things. That's not really what's happening. And I know that I have said before that I do not regret getting together with Owen and the way that that happened. But a regret that I do have is that I at all ever participated in the gaslighting of somebody that mattered to me. I made him feel like he had to be imagining things and had him second guessing himself all the time. And that is something that I am not proud of and something that I never, ever want to do again. And probably one of the deepest regrets of my life. It's a poisonous thing to do to somebody, and it doesn't go away. I think that's the part that's like the worst, is that once that's done to you, you don't really ever come back from it. It will always be there in your head as a little bit of a suspicion, and you wondering if you're nuts, and you wondering, could this person possibly do the thing? No, I don't think they would, but I didn't think so-and-so would either. So if you're not somebody who tells when you know somebody's cheating, I do understand why you wouldn't be. I get the position that some people are in, thinking it's none of my business. But a lot of the time, I feel if you have any connection at all to the person, it is your business. Because them operating with all the facts and being able to make a smart decision for themselves regarding their relationships based on full and complete information is your business if you care about anybody involved at all. Now, this situation with Veronica and the professor is a really weird one because she isn't attached to either of them. She is under the power of the professor in a lot of ways, but it's not, they hadn't started to develop a relationship. If she found this out after she had started to get close to him and had an enormous amount of respect for him and had invested a lot of time in conversations with him and training with him and all of this, and then she found out, I think it's pretty clear that she would feel a loyalty to him and not Sigh, because tends to, like, I feel like she tries to let people do the right thing on their own. But in this situation where she doesn't know either person very well, I feel like maybe the last day of class with this guy, maybe she tells, or maybe she hints to the dean's wife that she knows and hopes that that will spur that woman to do the right thing and tell her husband. I don't know. I'm really, really, like, it seems like what has happened here is that she has agreed she isn't going to say anything, and he has sort of quelled her by promising this internship isn't related to that. So I think this is where it's going to stay for at least a little while. But the dean is honestly a pretty big factor this season, like much more so than I ever expected. And we find out a little bit later with what's his face, the guy that was like accused of rape and is locked up, that the dean like owes him a bunch of money and is probably low-key rooting for this guy to get convicted of these rapes because that would just take him out of the running and he wouldn't have this debt anymore. So I'm wondering if there won't be something going on with the dean later on in the season where he does find out about his wife. I have no idea what that looks like. But anyway, okay, so Rachel's here. Hi, Rachel. So let's see. I'm trying to figure out what the... Okay, so I haven't really talked too much about what the deal was with Veronica and this girl, because I kind of like, in just talking about her not being as cynical as Veronica, I feel like that was really the point of her. Her function in the story is to be the girl who has perfect faith. And so there's not a whole lot to the story itself, in my view, and I could be proven wrong about this later on. It feels that the only possible explanation is that we needed Veronica to go over to the Fitzpatricks again to remind us who they are, which was a really weird thing. But Veronica's constant, like, looking at this girl like, are you serious? Because they find a voicemail from this girl, Scarlett, who is saying, hey, I'll meet you at the food court at 8:00. Did you tell your girlfriend? And the girlfriend's response is to hear this message and look at Veronica and say, weird, what do you make of that? And Veronica to give her a look like, are you fucking kidding? Because this girl, the instantaneous assumption is not, oh, he's cheating. And then we find out, sure enough, the two of them are going to study, and evidently, like, did you tell your girlfriend was meant to be, I know that she's visiting, but you're going to have to take some time away from her. Is she going to be mad at you? That is evidently what it was that she was asking. And it's kind of honestly a weird moment at the end of this when they find out that the kid got basically mugged by a Fitzpatrick. They go to the drunk tank where the kid is, and the girl says to Veronica, because Veronica's like, hey, I'm really sorry, by the way, for making a bunch of assumptions that turn out to be not true at all. And the girl says, that's okay. I wouldn't have believed it either if I had never been in love before. So what does that mean? Because I feel like the implication there is if you love somebody, really love them, you would never suspect anything because you'd know. Which I feel leads to the next conclusion, which is the insinuation that Veronica doesn't really love Logan. And I personally think that's true. I don't think the two of them had chemistry. And I feel like that's gone. And when they are on screen together lately, I don't feel anything between the two of them. They seem bored and frustrated with each other all the time. And I don't feel love coming off her in regards to him. I feel like this episode, I see a little bit more of love coming off him in regard to her, at least in his reaction to seeing her being hurt at the end. But otherwise, I think that girl's assessment there is maybe not entirely true. I think that you can love a person and still kind of be like, oh man, is he fucking cheating? I don't think that that's an unreasonable thing to, conclusion to sort of enter your mind. But I think if you have a good, healthy relationship, you should be able to know that that isn't what's going on right off the bat. If you aren't totally secure, if you feel like maybe they aren't open with you or maybe they hide things from you, you could still love the person, but that doesn't mean that you guys have a healthy, good connection. So I'm wondering if this is supposed to be a bit of a hint from the show about the direction that they are going to take their relationship. Because it's odd. I said before that it feels like the fact that he's there to rescue her at the end is supposed to sort of erase where he was with Mercer and make it seem like her distrust of him or her reacting the way that she does to the news is unreasonable or just too harsh or whatever. But that one line could point to her maybe realizing that she doesn't love Logan the way that she thought. Or if she does, she needs to clean up her act in terms of the way that she thinks about him. If it's the second one, I hate it. You guys already know how I feel about the show painting Veronica as unreasonable when I feel like she's honestly just human and she has seen a lot of shit. I don't blame her. But man, Logan, what he did and his excuses about it, I just could never come back from that. I could never see my guy in the same light again if I found out that he had been involved in something like that. And I just don't, I hope that the show was laying that down as a precursor to her beginning to question how much she actually feels for him. Because honestly, Logan's been losing me this season because of how they've been writing him. They keep on making him be unnecessarily evasive and shady in order to prove a point about her being too suspicious. And it's just not really in good faith and doesn't feel genuine. I would like it if she could be with somebody that is open-hearted the way that Duncan had been. We've gotten a little bit of a sort of hint at what's going on with Duncan, but I do wonder where he's at right now. Because Duncan is sort of the polar opposite of Logan in terms of how much of an open book he is. And he doesn't hide things. He's just very, he's just the quintessential good boy cinnamon roll type, I want somebody like that for her again. Logan's just convenient. It feels like he was convenient to the story, and I'm kind of over them as a relationship. We'll see. but I don't know. Honestly, when I step back, there's not a lot that's working for me this season. Most of the plots and the relationships I'm not invested in, or I'm upset over the way what direction they're taking things in. The one exception is Keith Mars and Harmony. I think this episode handled that pretty well. Keith, obviously, is serious about her. Like, he really feels something for her. But Veronica decides that she doesn't want to live in the house with him while he is seeing this married woman. Now, I think maybe that's a little harsh, but I really do, as much as I completely sympathized with Keith going back to the room and sleeping with her after this accident, and I totally get it, I also totally get where Veronica's coming from. It is an awkward thing to live with a parent who is having an affair that you know they shouldn't be. I speak from experience. And it's not even like this is something that he's being particularly discreet about, which my parent was. They didn't know for a long time that I was aware of what was going on. Years. With her, it's only recently come to her attention, but he knows that she knows. And he's sort of not hiding it and just expects her to roll with it. I mean, he didn't come home that night. There is no bigger signal that he just doesn't really care what she has to say about it than straight up not coming home, which I thought was a bold move on his part. Like, on the one hand, I think he maybe should have. And if he kept it discreet, maybe this could have, been avoided, this entire thing between him and her. However, if he had kept it discreet, it might have drawn it all out. And I think in the end, Veronica acts as his conscience in a way that isn't her pushing him to do something that he wouldn't otherwise do. I think it's her pushing him to acknowledge facts that he knows just as well as she does, but is refusing to look at when he is talking to himself about what's going on. And it's not until she stands in front of him and says the same shit to him that he kind of can't look away from it anymore. So I rather liked the dynamic between the two of them, even though I do think she doesn't quite understand how serious things are between the two of them. They have a genuine chemistry, and I do believe that Harmony has real feelings for Keith too. Whether or not Veronica knows how much they actually care about each other is ultimately irrelevant. She is still married. And I really like the scene where Keith tries to tell her what's going on between the two of us is something special. And she says, "You know who I've heard that from? Every John we've caught with his pants around his ankles." And he gets really salty about her saying that, and then tries to say, Harmony is leaving her husband. And she says, "Does her husband know that? Do you fucking hear yourself?" And honestly, she's not wrong. Like, if you are so certain she's going to leave her husband, you wait till she does that. If you are really sure and you have faith that she's going to do that, let her do it. And I do kind of wish that he had had that conversation with Harmony, because later on, she's trying to, first of all, get him to come home with her again. And he's just like, "Hey, no, I'm not doing that." Then she wants to go to Palm Springs with him. And he sort of makes it sound like he's going to be down to go. But then when she shows up with a car ready, she's asking why his bags aren't packed. And he says he can't. And she tells him, before this scene, she tells him, "I'm going to leave my husband." I wish that he had said, "If that's true, let's wait until that is settled. If you really are going to leave him." I would have liked because Keith has seen the same shit that Veronica has seen. So I want him to kind of hold her to that in a way that he knows most people don't do. But it seems by the end of this episode that he has straight up broke things off with her. And I don't totally disagree with that decision in theory, but I would have liked to put her to the test a little bit and see how honest she's actually being with him. Because if she was just going to string him along and never actually break up with her husband, that sucks, and she's not the person that he thought. But what if she turns out to be telling him the truth, and the next thing he knows, she's filed, but he's seemed to have dumped her? I assume she's going to come back around and be like, hey, guess what? Divorce filings are proceeding. I hope. But I guess we'll see. And then we have, thrown into the whole mix, Vinny turning up. And this was the thing I was afraid of. Last episode I said she could leave her husband, but if he finds out that she's cheating, that's a major advantage for him in divorce court. And I don't know if he suspects anything or, if he would dig and find out, but that would be real bad news for her. It turns out he already suspects and hired Vinny. And so Vinny brings the photos of her and Keith and says, if you pay me double what he's paying, and I think he says the husband's paying him $2,000. If you pay me double what he's paying, I won't show him these photos. I assume Keith pays the money. I don't know how he affords that. That's a tall order. But I really wonder if he didn't, what happens if she tries to leave him. Because it's one thing to just assume I'm going to tell him things aren't working between us. I think you know that. I believe that we should just end this amicably and move on. It's one thing to have that situation. And it's quite another to tell your husband I'm leaving and him be like, oh yeah? Well, you can go ahead and leave, but you're getting like half of what you think you're getting. A woman who's accustomed to a certain lifestyle, which it seems like Harmony is, it takes more than you would think for them to give that up. A lot of the time. And I really wonder how she'd handle that. Would she choose to leave after all? Would she be willing to sacrifice her way of life for Keith, for the opportunity to actually be with him? Or more to the point, for the opportunity to get out of an unhappy marriage? Because let me tell you guys, the security that I had when I was with my first husband was a major factor in me delaying leaving, because I had never felt secure. And I wasn't sure if I ever could again. Genuinely. It sucks to feel that money is a reason to stay with a person, but it's just the facts. When you live in a capitalist society, plenty of people stay in abusive, straight up abusive relationships, never mind just unhappy ones, because living by yourself is practically impossible these days. Almost everybody needs a roommate at the very minimum. And a lot of people wind up moving in together too quickly because they want to split the fucking rent with somebody and they just hope it works out. I mean, I moved here a little bit sooner than I probably would have if I had been able to afford to live on my own. I'll be honest. It worked out superbly in my case, but that's kind of the exception. And I'm really curious for her. How much she likes Keith, how much she values her own happiness. She tries to tell him staying in this unhappy marriage is a bad idea. And he cites them having a kid together, which is one of those things that I just think is the worst idea. If you use the fact that you have a child with somebody as an excuse to keep a marriage that's unhappy together, I think you are rationalizing and just finding an excuse to not do something traumatic and tumultuous to your life. And you're using the kid as your reasoning, when really it's more that you just don't want to go through that. If you don't want to go through that, I mean, that's valid. It's a tough thing to deal with. I get it. But don't put it on your kid, because kids know when your marriage is unhappy. Kids are fucking way smarter than we give them credit for. And all we see in media are kids that are like, no, why are you breaking up? Can't you guys be together? I can't believe this is happening. Talk to the children of kids whose parents got divorced, and you will find a lot more stories than you would expect of kids who were like, oh yeah, I watched them fight for 8 years before they finally fucking divorced, thank God. In my case, they didn't divorce until after I was in college. And I was just like, seriously, you guys should have divorced a decade ago. No kidding. I was waiting for it my whole life, practically. It took you forever. So, anyway. And then there's the whole thing that's going on this episode with, I say that it's going on with Wallace, but he isn't actually in this episode. We just hear that he has basically gone to a motel to study because he can't focus where he's at. And his roommate had been with him, but apparently Wallace is just like very intolerant of any sort of distraction and told him to get the fuck out. So Veronica is choosing to crash in his bed while Wallace is away in order to avoid her dad. By the end of the episode, her dad tells her he ended things with Harmony and that he wants her to come home. And this all leads up to the final scene, which is a really upsetting one, honestly. Logan's wandering around looking for her, and there's a kind of a weird scene between him and the kid whose name I'll never remember, who's Wallace's roommate. And there's almost, it feels like Logan's sort of wondering if this kid is fucking around with her or something. And while he's looking for her, Veronica is at the food court. And she goes up to the, the counter, because she sees a hair in her food. And she's like, oh, that is super gross. And leaves her drink sitting on the table. And when she comes back, she is checking her phone. And all of a sudden, thank you, Rachel. I will never remember it. I don't know why I have such a fucking mental block regarding his name. It's like maybe just the fact that his name is so weird. But also I think because it's just a single syllable-less away from piss that I don't want him to have that name, because it's just, it feels like mean. It feels like a mean thing that he has that name. But I guess he chose his nickname, so I guess. But yeah, she takes a sip of her drink and she's checking her phone. Everything seems to be normal. And then she looks up and there's this weird camera thing that happens. And she's sitting there like, what is going on? And a few minutes later, and by the way, when she's checking her messages, it's just Logan, 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 Dad, Logan, Logan, Logan. He's been calling her all day wanting to know where she is, and she hasn't wanted to talk to him. The camera does this weird thing, and at one point when she's leaving, she thinks to herself, oh my God, I know this feeling. To me, that's the worst part of this whole ordeal, is the fact that this has happened to her before, and she knows it, and the dread surrounding it is so palpable. Now, personally, if I were her, and I'm not trying to victim blame here, because I get why she decides to try and do what she does. I assume that she wasn't going to her car to drive home. I assumed that she was going to her car in order to lock herself in so that whomever drugged her couldn't get at her. And that's not a terrible idea. I hope she wasn't intending to drive, because she would have just wound up in a fucking flattened against a pillar in that state. But if I'm her, I know this feeling. I'm sitting in a crowded food hall, surrounded by people, and I have my phone right here. I am calling for help. I am not moving, and I am letting somebody know where I am and what just happened. And that's because with her situation, she knows what this is. Me, I start feeling this way. I'm not sure that I think, oh, I've been drugged right away. Maybe I would, because she left her drink alone. And a lot of us women, we know that doing that is a risk, even though most of us, probably one time in our lives, as much as it is a risk, we've had to do it. But I think if this feeling is familiar enough that you're like, oh my God, I've been drugged, and that's immediately like what you realize is happening, staying put and alerting somebody to your location and letting people around you know is probably the better thing to do. But again, it's just hitting her, and her assumption that she can make it to her car in time to lock herself in. I understand that impulse. She's somebody who doesn't like reaching out for help, and probably, oh yeah, see, Rachel says, I think she just feels so isolated from everyone else and is used to just depending on herself, but she definitely should have done that. Also, I definitely think she would never drink something she had left alone. It's the kind of thing that I would normally agree, but I think if I'm her, I'm not assuming that anybody's targeting people at the food hall. I'm assuming it's happening at parties. So this is like an instance in which I could see that not really seeming to be a big red flag to her. It's just, there are so many people around and nobody is drunk. You would think somebody would notice her drink being spiked. And that, like, for me, I would want to believe that. Like, so didn't anybody see something? But, you know, it's just not always how things work. And yeah, I think that part of what's supposed to be going on here for her is that she is so mad at Logan and mad at her dad that those are the two people she would instinctively let know, or Wallace, who's away, and both of them, she doesn't really want to ask for their help right now. Logan winds up coming to her rescue without her having to ask because he's just looking for her. But I think she feels weird about asking for the help. Even if you do, though, call the cops. Honestly, just let Lamb know, dude, my drink was spiked. Like, Lamb sucks, but he's very invested in this case, it feels like, in a way that I think does him a little bit of credit. And because of her poking her head in and messing with stuff, the fact that she's been targeted, I think he would see the significance of that and give her some credence. And, you know, however, that is not what she does. She kind of panics as she begins to realize what happened to her. At first, she sort of tries to shake it off and she keeps eating, and it seems like she's going, okay, you know what? Maybe it's nothing. But as she leaves the food hall, it's becoming clearer and clearer that some shit is going on. And she really is like, oh, God damn it. And as she is heading to her car, there is this figure that starts to come up on her from inside because she's in one of those like underground parking garages. And this figure in a hoodie is off to the side watching. And I wondered for a second if maybe he wasn't even the guy. I thought maybe he's just somebody around, and because she's been drugged, she assumes that's him and he's harmless. Or maybe he's Logan. But we see Logan then when we cut back to Piz. They're talking still, so I'm like, oh, okay, so it's not Logan, but maybe it is still somebody harmless. But then, when she collapses, he reaches down to pick up her keys, and he has surgical gloves over his hands. And when I saw that, I was like, oh no, okay, so this is exactly who the fuck it seems like. With good presence of mind, considering, she reaches forward and presses the alarm button on her key fob to start the alarm on her car going, which is what gets Logan's attention. He is like near to the parking garage. He hears the alarm and looks over, and he sees her car's lights flashing and recognizes her car. And he comes running, and we saw the rapist press off on her key button. So he was right there, and I low-key wondered if Logan was even going to get there in time. But when he comes around the corner, the dude is gone and she is still on the ground. And he turns her over and she says, take me home. And he realizes what happened. The back of her head has been like a tiny bit shaved. It's really bloody too. It's like really awful. And I wondered, like, were they planning to, and by they I mean the rapist, was he planning to simply shave her head and make her think that she'd been raped? Or was he planning to shave her head and then rape her? It just seems like a weird thing to begin shaving her head first. I'm like assuming that in all the other cases, a rape kit was done and these girls were genuinely raped. Because, I mean, I wouldn't be mad at them for assuming that they had been raped and had their head shaved based on the fact that maybe that happened the first time. But there's definitely no time for him to have raped her and then begin shaving her head, which I had seen the head shaving as sort of like a trophy thing, that he was taking something to remember his victims by. And the idea that he would shave her head when he had not assaulted her falls kind of outside of my expectation of what he was intending to do. Which leads to another question of, was the intent to rape her or simply to terrify her? Because that's also super effective. He could leave her there with her head shaved and not actually rape her, and that's still sending a real fucking message that she should keep her fucking nose out of it. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to think. But he brings her home, and she wakes up to her dad administering some really nasty tasting medicine in order to, you know, counteract the effects of this drug. And she kind of has a warm fuzzy about the fact that the two of them are looking out for her before she falls asleep again. So that is the end of the episode. I am out of time, so I am going to have to go. But thank you, Rachel, for hanging out with me. Thank you again to Anna for commissioning this episode. I really have no idea what to expect for the rest of the season, guys. I'm so confused. Rachel, you missed the beginning, so I'm curious to hear what you think about my assessment of the argument between her and Logan. But let me know. And I will be seeing you guys again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.